Lunch with Emily. At noon, Daniel sat outside the staff room unwrapping a simple sandwich. Emily appeared, running toward him with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "Dad," she smiled, dropping beside him on the bench. He smiled back. "Hey, kiddo, how's your day?" "Good," she said between bites of her sandwich. "Everyone's talking about tomorrow's exhibition. Are we going?" Daniel hesitated. "Do you want to?" Emily nodded eagerly. "Yeah, I've never seen real martial arts before. They say the twins are amazing. Some of the kids are even scared of them." Daniel chuckled softly. "Being scary doesn't mean being great. Remember that." She looked up at him curiously. "How do you know?" He paused, looking into her bright brown eyes. How do I explain, he thought. She didn't know much about his past, about the years when martial arts wasn't just a sport for him, but a way of life. He had trophies once, medals locked in boxes in their small apartment closet. But he never bragged, never told her. Instead, he simply said, because true strength isn't about fear, it's about control, respect. Emily tilted her head, sensing there was more behind his words, but she let it go, returning to her sandwich. Whispers in the gym. That afternoon, Daniel was called to the gym to help set up mats for the exhibition. The smell of varnished wood mixed with the faint odor of sweat. Students volunteered to help, rolling out mats, moving chairs, and hanging banners. The Matthews twins stood at the center, practicing kicks that cracked sharply against the air. They were tall, broad-shouldered, and confident. Jake wore a smug grin while Ryan's eyes scanned the room for an audience. They thrived on attention. When Daniel entered with his mop and bucket, some students snickered. "Careful, mop man," one boy whispered loud enough to be heard. "Don't slip on the mats." The twins, too, earned smirks spreading across their faces. "Hey, old man," Jake called out, his voice carrying through the gym. "You ever fight before, or just mop floors?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Daniel kept his eyes on the mats, saying nothing. He knelt, adjusting the corner of one. Ryan stepped closer. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you're scared of a little sparring?" The students began to murmur, sensing drama. Daniel stood slowly, his expression calm. His silence only fueled their mockery. "Tell you what," Jake grinned, cracking his knuckles. "Why don't you step onto the mat tomorrow? We'll give the crowd a real show. Janitor versus champions." The students burst out laughing, some chanting, "Fight, fight!" Daniel shook his head and pushed his cart toward the exit. "I'm not here for games," he said quietly. But his calm refusal didn't kill the rumors. By the end of the day, whispers spread through every hallway. The janitor's gonna fight the twins, alone with the past. That evening, after his shift, Daniel walked home with Emily through the drizzle. They lived in a small, modest apartment a few blocks from school. Inside, Emily curled up on the couch with homework, while Daniel fixed a simple dinner. But his mind wasn't on the soup boiling on the stove. It was back in the gym, with the laughter, the taunts, and the challenge. He went into his bedroom, opening the closet. At the back, beneath old coats, sat a dusty wooden box. He knelt, brushing off the lid, and opened it. Inside lay faded photographs of his younger self, standing in a crisp martial arts uniform, trophies lined behind him. His face was younger, sharper, filled with a fire he had long since buried. Daniel picked up one medal, the ribbon frayed at the edges. He closed his eyes. "I walked away from this, for Emily, for a quiet life." But the storm outside rattled the window. And deep in his chest, something stirred, a question he hadn't allowed himself to ask in years. Was it really gone, or was it only sleeping, alone with the past? That evening, after his shift, Daniel walked home with Emily through the drizzle. They lived in a small, modest apartment a few blocks from school. Inside, Emily curled up on the couch with homework while Daniel fixed a simple dinner. But his mind wasn't on the soup boiling on the stove. It was back in the gym, with the laughter, the taunts, and the challenge. He went into his bedroom, opening the closet. At the back, beneath old coats, sat a dusty wooden box. He knelt, brushing off the lid, and opened it. Inside lay faded photographs of his younger self, standing in a crisp martial arts uniform, trophies lined behind him. His face was younger, sharper, filled with a fire he had long since buried. Daniel picked up one medal, the ribbon frayed at the edges. He closed his eyes. I walked away from this, for Emily, for a quiet life. But the storm outside rattled the windows, and deep in his chest something stirred, a question he hadn't allowed himself to ask in years. Was it really gone? Or was it only sleeping? Emily's concern. At dinner, Emily noticed her father's silence. "Dad, what's wrong?" He forced a smile. "Nothing, kiddo, just tired." She frowned. "Did something happen at school? I heard kids talking. They said you're going to fight the twins tomorrow. That's not true, right?" Daniel hesitated, then shook his head. "No, I don't fight anymore." "Good," Emily sighed in relief. "Because they're scary. They could hurt you." Her words cut deeper than she knew. For years, Daniel had protected her from pain, from fear, from the world's harshness. Now even she saw him as fragile, someone who could be hurt by teenagers. That night, long after Emily had fallen asleep, Daniel sat alone by the window watching the rain. His reflection in the glass looked older, weaker than the man in those photos. He whispered to himself, almost like a vow, "I don't fight anymore. But maybe, just maybe, tomorrow, I'll have to." Cliffhanger ending of Part 1. The next morning, Oak Ridge High buzzed louder than ever. Posters flapped against the walls, students whispered excitedly in the halls, and teachers tried to calm the growing frenzy. At the center of it all was one question. Would the quiet janitor step into the ring against the twin black belts? As Daniel walked into the building with his mop and bucket, hundreds of eyes followed him. He felt the weight of expectation pressing down, but his face stayed calm, unreadable. Inside, though, a storm was brewing. Because the truth was, Daniel Carter wasn't just a janitor, and the school was about to find out. Emily's concern. At dinner, Emily noticed her father's silence. "Dad, what's wrong?" He forced a smile. "Nothing, kiddo, just tired." She frowned. "Did something happen at school? I heard kids talking. They said you're going to fight the twins tomorrow. That's not true, right?" Daniel hesitated, then shook his head. "No, I don't fight anymore." "Good," Emily sighed in relief. "Because they're scary. They could hurt you." Her words cut deeper than she knew. For years, Daniel had protected her from pain, from fear, from the world's harshness. Now even she saw him as fragile, someone who could be hurt by teenagers. That night, long after Emily had fallen asleep, Daniel sat alone by the window watching the rain. His reflection in the glass looked older, weaker than the man in those photos. He whispered to himself, almost like a vow, "I don't fight anymore. But maybe, just maybe, tomorrow, I'll have to." Cliffhanger ending of Part 1. The next morning, Oak Ridge High buzzed louder than ever. Posters flapped against the walls, students whispered excitedly in the halls, and teachers tried to calm the growing frenzy. At the center of it all was one question. Would the quiet janitor step into the ring against the twin black belts? As Daniel walked into the building with his mop and bucket, hundreds of eyes followed him. He felt the weight of expectation pressing down, but his face stayed calm, unreadable. Inside, though, a storm was brewing. Because the truth was, Daniel Carter wasn't just a janitor, and the school was about to find out. The challenge. The next day at Oak Ridge High, the atmosphere was charged with an energy that no teacher could control. Students flooded the hallways buzzing about one thing and one thing only, the martial arts exhibition that was set to happen later in the gymnasium. It wasn't just a regular event anymore. Rumors had spread like wildfire that the school's quiet janitor, Daniel Carter, had been challenged to step onto the mat against the Matthews twins. The whispers carried from classroom to cafeteria, and by the time lunch arrived, it felt as if every student and teacher knew about it. Posters for the exhibition suddenly looked brighter, more alive. because behind those bold letters promising martial arts in action, there was now a story of David versus Goliath. Daniel, however, walked the halls with his usual composure, pushing his cart, cleaning spills, fixing lockers that jammed, pretending as if nothing had changed. His face remained calm, his movements steady, but inside his chest there was a growing storm. He could feel the stares, the smirks, the hushed laughter. Some students trailed him as if waiting for him to announce that he would accept the fight. Others pointed and whispered, their words slicing through him like knives. He'll never do it. He's too old. Those twins will break him in half. Daniel heard it all, but he swallowed it down like bitter medicine, refusing to show even the smallest reaction. In the gymnasium, the Matthews twins were already holding court. They stood at the center of the mat, practicing spins, high kicks, and mock sparring matches, while groups of students sat on the bleachers, cheering them on. Jake, the louder of the two, thrived in the spotlight, constantly performing for his audience. Ryan was more calculating, watching people's reactions as if feeding off their admiration. When Daniel entered the gym to sweep the floor near the bleachers, the twins immediately noticed. "Look who's here," Jake called out, his voice cutting across the gym like a whip. "The man of the hour, our special guest." He grinned widely, strutting toward Daniel with his hands behind his head in a mock stretch. "Tell me, Mr. Carter, did you bring your mop for the fight? Maybe you'll use it as a weapon." The students erupted in laughter, some clapping, others chanting, "Mop man, mop man." The humiliation was meant to sting, but Daniel simply bent down, collected a stray water bottle from the floor, and tossed it into his trash bag. His silence made Jake press harder. "You know, I've been thinking," Jake continued, circling him like a shark. "Every school has a legend. Wouldn't it be fun if ours was about the janitor who thought he could fight?" Ryan joined in now, his smirk calculated and cruel. "You should say yes. Give the kids a memory. One day they'll tell their grandchildren about the day the old man got flattened in the Oak Ridge gym." Daniel finally straightened and looked at them. His dark eyes were calm, not angry, not even defensive. Just calm, like still water before a storm. "I'm not here to fight children," he said evenly, his voice steady and quiet, yet strong enough for everyone to hear. The words weren't defiant, but they carried weight, and for a moment, even the laughter dimmed. But Jake was quick to fill the silence. "Children? We're black belts, old man. We've won tournaments you wouldn't survive 5 minutes in." He stepped closer, lowering his voice but making sure the crowd could still hear. "Or maybe you're just scared." That word, scared, hung in the air. Students gasped, waiting to see how Daniel would respond. For teenagers eager for spectacle, the idea that the janitor might back down made it even juicier. Daniel exhaled slowly, then returned to sweeping the edge of the bleachers. "I have nothing to prove to you," he said quietly. But those words did not calm the storm. Instead, they fueled it. The crowd began chanting again, louder this time. "Fight! Fight! Fight!" The gym shook with the rhythm of young voices demanding entertainment. The principal entered to check on the setup and upon hearing the chants frowned but did not intervene. For him too, the thought of the janitor sparring with the twins was almost too strange, too tempting to dismiss outright. By the end of that day, Daniel's refusal had become twisted in the rumor mill. Some said he had already agreed. Others swore they saw him nod. The Matthews brothers boasted loudly in the cafeteria that the fight would happen, feeding the frenzy. Emily, sitting alone at her lunch table, overheard it all and felt her stomach twist with worry. That evening at home, she confronted her father again. "Dad, please don't do it," she begged as he set plates on the dinner table. "They're mean and they're strong. Everyone says they'll hurt you. You don't have to prove anything." Her small hands gripped his wrist, her voice shaking with fear. Daniel sat down across from her, his tired eyes softening. "Emily," he said gently, "I don't care what people say. My only job is to take care of you." "Then don't fight them," she insisted. "Promise me." His chest ached at the desperation in her voice. He wanted to promise her to take away her fear, but promises had weight, and he knew the world sometimes forced choices no one wanted. He reached across the table, held her hand, and said, "I'll do everything I can to keep things peaceful." It wasn't the promise she wanted, but it was the only truth he could give. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, Daniel found himself back at the closet. He opened the wooden box again and traced the edges of a faded photograph of himself standing on a podium, first-place medal hanging around his neck, his wife's smile, proudly, at his side. He closed his eyes and remembered the years of training, the discipline, the sweat, the lessons in humility. He hadn't been just a fighter, he had been a martial artist. That part of him wasn't gone. It had been buried under years of mops and empty classrooms waiting to be called again. As he sat there in silence, the rain started again, harder this time, drumming against the glass like a war drum. And though Daniel whispered again, "I don't fight anymore," a part of him knew the choice might no longer be his to make. The Matthews twins had already decided. The school had already decided. By tomorrow night, the question would no longer be whether Daniel wanted to fight. It would be whether he could rise to the moment that everyone else demanded. The storm outside thundered, and inside his chest, another storm rumbled awake. Shadows of the past. The following morning, Oak Ridge High School looked the same on the outside, but inside its walls, the atmosphere was electric. Students were restless, teachers struggled to maintain order, and the gymnasium was already being prepared for the evening's martial arts exhibition. Yet beneath the noise of excited chatter, one man carried the weight of silence heavier than anyone else. Daniel Carter moved through the halls as always, cart rattling softly, mop buckets sloshing with water, but each step felt heavier than the last. The rumors had now grown into certainty in the minds of the students. To them, it wasn't a question of if the janitor would fight the Matthews twins, but when. Whispers followed him everywhere. He doesn't stand a chance. He's too old. What if he surprises them? No way. He'll be embarrassed. Some students laughed openly when he passed. Others watched with curious eyes, wondering if the quiet man who fixed lockers and swept floors could really step into the spotlight. Daniel didn't respond to any of it, but every word carried the sting of memory, because once, long ago, he had lived in the spotlight of martial arts. Once people had cheered his name, not laughed behind his back. Once he had stood on mats not as a joke, but as a champion. That afternoon, when his shift ended, Daniel walked Emily home under a pale gray sky. She clutched his hand tightly, unusually quiet for her age. When they reached their small apartment, she dropped her backpack and blurted out, "Dad, I don't want you to fight them, please." Daniel set his mop against the wall and sighed, his heart heavy. "Emily, we've talked about this. I don't want to fight either. But everyone's saying it's already decided. The whole school thinks you're going to." Her voice cracked, tears welling in her eyes. "What if they hurt you? What if you—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but her trembling lips revealed what she feared most, losing him, the only parent she had left. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "Emily, listen to me. I promised your mother I would protect you no matter what. That's all that matters, nothing else. Do you understand?" She buried her face into his chest, nodding, but the fear didn't leave her. And in that moment, Daniel knew that no matter what happened, he could not allow Emily to see him as weak, helpless, or broken. He had already failed once in her young life, when her mother, his wife, had slipped away from a long illness. He had stood at the hospital bed holding Emily's hand as they both cried, and he had promised her then that he would carry the weight of both parents on his shoulders. That promise was what made him leave the world of martial arts behind. No more competitions, no more sparring, no more broken bones and bruised ribs. His life became work, school runs, cooking meals, and bedtime stories. But the past had a way of clawing back, and now, in the echo of teenage laughter and arrogant taunts, the shadow of the fighter he once was pressed against the life he had built. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. He stared at the wooden box sitting in front of him, the same box he had opened before. But tonight he lifted the lid with more purpose. Inside were relics of another life. Photographs of him in pristine white uniforms, belts of different colors marking his journey, medals and trophies that gleamed even through dust, and certificates bearing his name in bold letters. Daniel Carter, first place, state champion. He lifted one photograph and studied it. In it, he was in his 20s, standing with his wife Anna after winning a regional championship. His hair was darker, his posture proud, his eyes burning with determination. Beside him, Anna's smile was radiant, her arm hooked around his waist, her face filled with pride and love. Daniel closed his eyes and could almost hear her voice again. "You're not just fighting opponents, Danny," she had told him once. "You're fighting yourself, your fear, your doubt, your limits, and every time you win, you prove not just to others, but to yourself, that you're stronger than you think." The memory tightened his chest. Anna had believed in him when no one else did. She had cheered him through every victory and comforted him through every defeat. Losing her had shattered not only his heart but the very foundation of his life. That was why he had put the gloves away, why he had packed the uniforms into boxes and left them to gather dust. Without her, the fire had gone out. But tonight, as rain lashed against the window again, Daniel realized the fire hadn't died. It had only been smothered by grief and responsibility. And now, as the school and the twins forced him into a corner, the embers began to glow again. He set the photograph down and picked up an old black belt, its fabric, worn and fraying from years of use. He tied it loosely in his hands, the muscle memory returning instantly, his fingers moving as if no time had passed. He stood, stretched his arms, and dropped into a stance he hadn't practiced in years. His body protested, his back stiff, his joints aching, but the rhythm returned, like a forgotten song remembered note by note. For an hour, Daniel moved in the small living room, flowing through strikes, blocks, and kicks. He was slower than before, heavier, but there was still precision in his movement, still control. Sweat dripped down his face, his breathing deepened, and for the first time in years, he felt alive in a way he hadn't since Anna had passed. When he finally stopped, chest heaving, he caught sight of himself in the window's reflection. He didn't see just a janitor anymore. He saw the shadow of the fighter he once was, and maybe, just maybe, the man he could still be. The following morning at school, the tension reached a breaking point. Students lined the hallways when Daniel entered, whispering and nudging each other. The Matthews twins strutted past him, smirking like kings waiting for their coronation. "See you tonight, old man," Jake sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Ryan added, "Don't forget to stretch. Wouldn't want you to pull something before we embarrass you." Daniel didn't respond, but inside the decision had already been made. He hadn't spoken it out loud, not even to Emily, but he knew he couldn't run from this any longer. Not because he wanted to fight, but because sometimes life chose battles for you, and this one, whether he liked it or not, was his to face. The first strike, the night of the exhibition, arrived, and Oak Ridge High had never looked so alive. By 6 o'clock, the gymnasium was filled beyond capacity. Students, parents, teachers, and even townspeople who had heard the rumors cram met into the bleachers, their voices blending into a low, restless roar. The basketball hoops were raised, the wooden floor covered with bright blue mats, and a massive banner reading Oak Ridge Martial Arts Exhibition stretched across the wall. The air smelled of sweat, varnish, and the faint, buttery scent of popcorn from a concession stand. Lights blazed down onto the mats, turning the gym into a small arena, and in that glow, the entire school seemed to pulse with anticipation. The Matthews twins thrived in the spotlight. Dressed in matching black uniforms with red trim, they warmed up at the center of the mat, stretching, bouncing lightly on their feet, their movements exaggerated for the crowd. Jake executed a sharp spinning kick that cracked through the air like a whip, and the audience gasped in admiration. Ryan followed with a flurry of punches into the air, each one punctuated with a sharp ki shout. They were showmen as much as fighters, and tonight they had an audience ready to worship them. But the whispers that filled the bleachers were not just about the twins' skill. They were about the rumor. The possibility that the quiet janitor, Daniel Carter, would be stepping onto that mat. Some laughed at the idea, imagining the humiliation. Others leaned forward with curiosity, secretly hoping for a miracle, for the chance to witness something extraordinary. Even the teachers had stopped pretending disinterest. The principal, arms folded, watched with a mixture of unease and fascination. Backstage, in a narrow hallway near the gym's supply closet, Daniel sat on a folding chair, his elbows resting on his knees. He wore no uniform, no flashy colors, just a plain white t-shirt and gray sweatpants. His hands rested loosely together, but his mind was sharp, focused in a way it hadn't been in years. Emily sat beside him, her small hands fidgeting nervously. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you don't have to do this. No one will think less of you if you walk away." Daniel turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His eyes were calm, steady, and in them she saw something she hadn't before: resolve. "Emily, sometimes in life we don't choose the fight chooses us. Tonight isn't about pride, and it isn't about proving anything to those boys. It's about showing you, and maybe everyone else, that strength isn't what they think it is." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. Deep down, though scared, she trusted him. She always had. When the announcer's voice boomed through the gym speakers, the crowd hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Oak Ridge High School's martial arts exhibition. Tonight you'll witness skills, discipline, and strength from some of our best martial artists. But before the main demonstrations begin, we have a very special exhibition match." The gym erupted with cheers. The twins strutted forward, waving mockingly at the crowd like celebrities. Jake grabbed the microphone from the announcer. "We've been challenged tonight," he shouted, though everyone knew the truth was the opposite. "The challenger? None other than your very own Janitor." His grin was wide and cruel as he pointed toward the hallway. "Come on out, Mr. Mop Man." The bleachers roared with laughter, stamping feet, clapping hands. It was chaos, a high school circus in full bloom. And then, from the shadows of the hallway, Daniel Carter walked out. The laughter dimmed slightly. There was something about the way he moved, not flashy, not hurried, but deliberate. His shoulders were straight, his head lifted, his eyes calm. He wasn't in uniform, and that alone made the crowd murmur. No belt, no G, just a simple man in a t-shirt stepping onto the mat as though he belonged there anyway. Emily sat at the very front of the bleachers, her small hands clutched tightly together, her heart pound. Seeing the twins smirked, circling him like predators. Jake leaned in close, whispering so only Daniel could hear. "Don't worry, we'll make it quick." Ryan added, "Try not to break a hip." The referee, a local instructor from the visiting martial arts academy, looked uneasy but raised his hand anyway. "This is an exhibition match," he reminded them. "Respect the rules. Begin when I signal." The crowd hushed. The gym seemed to hold its breath. The referee's hand dropped. "Begin." Jake lunged forward first, his speed sharp and aggressive, a front kick aimed squarely at Daniel's chest. Gasps echoed through the gym, but Daniel didn't flinch. With a subtle shift of his weight, he sidestepped, his body flowing smoothly, and Jake's kick sliced through empty air. Daniel's hand tapped Jake's shoulder as he passed, not striking but redirecting, using Jake's own momentum to send him stumbling forward. The crowd gasped again, this time not in laughter but in shock. Daniel hadn't just dodged. He had controlled the exchange, turning it into something graceful, almost effortless. Jake spun around, his grin faltering. Ryan stepped in now, throwing a sharp combination of punches. Daniel's arms moved like water, blocking and parrying with precision, his body rotating just enough to let each strike pass harmlessly by. His face remained calm, unreadable, his movements exact. For the first time, the laughter in the bleachers stopped. Silence spread as realization began to dawn. The janitor wasn't clumsy, he wasn't afraid, he wasn't overmatched. He was something else entirely. Jake, now frustrated, let out a loud shout and charged again. He spun into a high roundhouse kick aimed at Daniel's head, a move designed not just to strike but to humiliate, to show everyone the janitor couldn't defend himself. The kick cut through the air, fast and powerful. The crowd gasped, Emily cried out, and for a heartbeat it looked as if the fight would end in that instant. But Daniel moved. With perfect timing, he stepped forward, closing the distance before the kick could land, his hoe, and shot out, catching Jake's leg in midair. Gasps erupted as Daniel twisted his body, guiding Jake's momentum and sending him crashing harmlessly onto the mat. The sound echoed through the gym. Jake scrambled to his feet, his face red, his grin gone. The gym exploded, not with laughter this time, but with disbelief. Students leaned forward, teachers exchanged stunned looks, and Emily's eyes widened with pride she couldn't contain. The Matthews twins weren't in control anymore. For the first time, the school realized the truth. The janitor wasn't the one in danger. The twins were. The turnaround. The gymnasium was no longer buzzing with laughter. The moment Daniel caught Jake's leg and sent him sprawling to the mat, the mood shifted into something heavier, something electric. Students who had expected a comedy, a spectacle at the janitor's expense, suddenly leaned forward, their mouths open in disbelief. Teachers who had smirked quietly in the corner now sat up straighter, exchanging looks that carried the same silent question. Who is this man we've overlooked all this time? Jake rose from the mat with his face burning red, a mixture of embarrassment and anger flooding his veins. He had never been handled like that, not in front of a crowd this size. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and barked, "Lucky move." But the words sounded hollow, even to him. Across the mat, Daniel stood motionless, his hands relaxed at his sides, breathing slow and steady, his calm presence only intensifying the humiliation. He hadn't mocked, hadn't gloated, hadn't even smiled. That calmness unnerved Jake more than any strike would have. Ryan stepped in now, determined to reassert their dominance. He circled Daniel carefully, his eyes narrowing as he measured the older man's stance. He launched forward with a flurry of punches, sharp and fast, each one aimed with the precision of years of training. But Daniel's body flowed like water, redirecting with the smallest movements, turning each punch into wasted energy. His feet shifted barely an inch at a time, yet he was always exactly where Ryan's strikes were not. Every failed blow chipped away at Ryan's confidence, the frustration mounting. The crowd began to murmur louder now, but it wasn't jeers or chants of "Mop Man." It was astonishment. Did you see that? He didn't even get touched. How's he moving like that? Students recorded on their phones, zooming in to capture every moment. What was meant to be humiliation was becoming history, a story they would tell for years. Jake, unwilling to be sidelined, leapt back into the fray. The twins attacked together now, a coordinated effort honed by years of sparring side by side. One struck high while the other struck low, their movements sharp and dangerous. To the untrained eye, it looked like a blur of fists, feet, and power, enough to overwhelm any opponent. But Daniel was no ordinary opponent. He read their rhythm like a book. Every time Ryan launched a jab, Daniel already knew Jake was circling with a kick. When Jake rushed forward, Daniel could feel Ryan closing in from the opposite side. He moved with a precision born not just from training, but from discipline. Years of experience that had sharpened him beyond technique into instinct. He ducked under a spinning kick, letting the wind of it brush over his head, then pivoted smoothly, placing his foot in just the right spot so Ryan stumbled into his own brother. The crowd erupted, the noise almost deafening. This wasn't luck, and it wasn't coincidence. It was control. Daniel was controlling the fight. Jake roared in frustration, throwing himself forward recklessly, a wild hook aimed at Daniel's face. This time Daniel didn't just evade. With a smooth pivot, he caught Jake's wrist mid-swing, twisted, and pivoted. In one effortless motion, Jake's body spun and dropped to his knees, his arm locked behind his back. Daniel held him there for only a second before releasing, stepping back calmly as Jake staggered away, clutching his shoulder, his face a mask of disbelief. Ryan froze, realization dawning. This man wasn't just defending himself, he was teaching them a lesson in front of the entire school. From the bleachers, Emily's heart pounded. She had been terrified, clutching the edge of her seat with white knuckles, afraid to see her father hurt. But now, as she watched him move with strength and grace, something new filled her chest. Pride. Her father wasn't weak, wasn't helpless, wasn't someone to pity. He was strong, stronger than anyone here realized. Her eyes welled with tears, but they weren't of fear anymore. They were of awe. The twins regrouped, breathing heavily, sweat dripping down their brows. Their arrogance had been replaced with desperation, though they still tried to mask it with snarls and bravado. Ryan spat onto the mat and growled, "You think you're better than us? You think you can humiliate us like this?" Daniel finally spoke, his voice low but carrying across the gym. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone. But strength without respect is weakness." The words struck like another blow. The crowd went silent for a moment, the weight of the statement sinking in. Then Ryan screamed and lunged again, fury driving his body. Daniel sidestepped with almost surgical precision, his hand snapping forward just enough to tap Ryan's chest and redirect his momentum. Ryan tumbled forward, barely catching himself before his face hit the mat. Jake tried to recover the spectacle, launching a desperate high kick aimed at Daniel's head, but Daniel, calm as ever, pivoted and swept Jake's supporting leg from under him. Jake's body hit the mat with a thud that echoed like a drumbeat through the gym. He groaned, trying to rise, but the effort was slow, clumsy. For a moment, everything froze. The Matthews twins, the undefeated black belts, the champions who had terrorized the hallways with their arrogance, were on their knees, panting and bruised. And the janitor, the man they thought would be their joke, stood untouched, his chest rising and falling steadily, his expression unshaken. The crowd erupted in thunderous cheers, not laughter. Chants of Janitor, Janitor filled the gym, echoing off the walls. Teachers who had doubted him clapped reluctantly. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Students jumped to their feet, phones raised, capturing every second. Emily leapt from her seat, tears streaming down her cheeks as she shouted with joy, "That's my dad!" For the first time, she wasn't hiding in his shadow. She was basking in the light of his strength. Daniel didn't celebrate. He didn't raise his fist or bow theatrically. He simply stood tall, his eyes on the twins as they struggled to rise again. His calmness was more powerful than any boast could be. Because in that calmness, the lesson was clear. He wasn't here to destroy them. He was here to teach them, and everyone watching, the true meaning of discipline. The twins exchanged a look, sweat dripping, pride wounded. They had never faced humiliation like this. But deep in their hearts, even as anger burned, a seed of respect began to form. They knew now that the man before them wasn't just a janitor. He was something far more dangerous and far more honorable. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had turned completely. The school no longer saw Daniel as a joke. They saw him as a mystery, a force, a man they would never forget. And in that moment, under the bright lights of the Oak Ridge gym, with hundreds of eyes locked on him, Daniel Carter became more than invisible. He became unforgettable. The respect earned. The gymnasium trembled with noise, the sound of hundreds of voices chanting, gasping, and shouting all at once. The air inside felt thick, as if everyone present knew they were witnessing something they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. The Matthews twins, once untouchable champions in the eyes of Oak Ridge High, now crouched on the mat, their shoulders heaving with exhaustion, their pride cracked open before the entire school. And standing across from them, calm, steady, and unmarked, was Daniel Carter, the man most of them had spent years ignoring, laughing at, or dismissing as nothing more than a janitor. The referee hesitated, looking uncertain if the match should even continue. He glanced at Daniel, silently asking if he wanted to press the advantage, to end the humiliation with one decisive strike. But Daniel's expression never changed. His eyes weren't filled with vengeance or arrogance. They were steady, calm, almost compassionate. The referee gave a small nod and stepped back, letting the moment play out. Jake, breathing heavily, forced himself upright, wiping sweat from his brow. His pride screamed louder than the pain in his body. "We're not done yet," he growled, glancing at Ryan, who slowly rose beside him. The two of them, battered and shaken, locked eyes with their opponent. They weren't used to standing across from someone who didn't mock them, someone who didn't need to prove himself through words. That silence unsettled them more than any strike ever could. The twins lunged together, desperation driving their movements. Their attacks were faster, sharper, but reckless. The crowd leaned forward as Ryan launched a spinning back fist while Jake dove in low for a leg sweep. To an untrained eye, it looked overwhelming, two champions cornering one man. But Daniel's body moved with the kind of precision that only came from decades of discipline. He pivoted smoothly, parrying. The legacy. The morning after the exhibition, Oak Ridge High School did not feel like the same place it had been the day before. The corridors were alive with a different kind of energy. Not the shallow gossip of teenagers, not the restless buzzing of sports scores or cafeteria rumors, but the lingering awe of something extraordinary they had all witnessed. Students crowded in tight groups, replaying shaky phone videos on their screens, showing each other clips of the moment Daniel had caught Jake's leg, The second he had redirected Ryan's strike, the calm way he had lifted both twins up instead of finishing them off. Those videos spread beyond the school's walls overnight, shared across town, then across the city. By morning, the humble janitor who once moved silently through the halls was the name on every student's lips, every teacher's conversation, every parent's curious question. Daniel, however, walked into the school with the same cart, the same mop, the same calm expression. The whispers followed him still, but now they carried a tone of respect instead of mockery. Where before students smirked or rolled their eyes, now they nodded, some even stepping aside to let him pass. A few even muttered, "Good morning, Mr. Carter," words they had never spoken before. Teachers paused when he entered classrooms to repair a chair or change a light bulb, watching him with new eyes, realizing that the man they had overlooked was carrying more than just buckets of water. He was carrying discipline, experience, and a strength deeper than appearances. Emily walked proudly beside him that day, her head held higher than it had ever been. She was no longer the girl whose father was just the janitor. She was the daughter of a man who had stood in front of the entire school and shown them what true strength looked like. Her friends surrounded her at lunch, asking question after question, their eyes wide as she told them how calm her father had been, how he had never even looked afraid. Pride radiated from her like sunlight, and for Daniel, that alone was worth every step he had taken onto that mat. The Matthews twins entered the cafeteria that afternoon, no longer strutting like kings. Their shoulders were heavier, their movements slower, their eyes avoiding the stares of students who had once cheered for them. But what shocked the crowd most was what happened next. The twins crossed the room and stopped in front of Daniel, who sat quietly at a corner table eating his modest sandwich. For a moment, the cafeteria went silent, waiting for another scene, another clash of arrogance. But Jake cleared his throat, his voice low and sincere. "Mr. Carter," he said, swallowing his pride, "we wanted to say thank you. You could have embarrassed us worse than you did. You could have hurt us, but you didn't. You taught us something." His brother nodded silently beside him, his head lowered in respect. Daniel looked up at them, his gaze steady but kind. "Every opponent teaches you something, if you're willing to learn," he said. "Last night wasn't about winning or losing. It was about respect. You'll understand that more with time." The twins bowed deeply, the kind of bow that wasn't forced or mocking, but genuine. The cafeteria erupted in whispers, students gasping at the sight of two champions humbling themselves before the janitor. For some, it was more shocking than the fight itself. From that day forward, Jake and Ryan were no longer feared bullies or arrogant show-offs. They became Daniel's first students. The principal, who had sat silently through the exhibition, approached Daniel a few days later in his office. "Mr. Carter," he began awkwardly, folding his hands on the desk, "I underestimated you. We all did. What you showed this school was more too than a fight." Daniel looked up at them, his gaze steady but kind. "Every opponent teaches you something, if you're willing to learn," he said. "Last night wasn't about winning or losing. It was about respect. You'll understand that more with time." The twins bowed deeply, the kind of bow that wasn't forced or mocking, but genuine. The cafeteria erupted in whispers, students gasping at the sight of two champions humbling themselves before the janitor. For some, it was more shocking than the fight itself. From that day forward, Jake and Ryan were no longer feared bullies or arrogant show-offs. They became Daniel's first students. The principal, who had sat silently through the exhibition, approached Daniel a few days later in his office. "Mr. Carter," he began awkwardly, folding his hands on the desk, "I underestimated you. We all did. What you showed this school was more than a fight. It was a lesson in discipline, in humility, in control. And I'd be a fool not to ask, would you consider starting an after-school program, a self-defense class perhaps, for the students who need guidance, who need discipline?" Daniel hesitated. He had never asked for more than the quiet life of providing for Emily, never sought the spotlight. But he thought of Emily's face the night of the exhibition shining with pride. He thought of the twins bowing in respect. He thought of the students, hungry not for violence but for purpose. Slowly he nodded. If it helps the kids, he said, then yes, I'll do it. And so, the janitor of Oak Ridge High became something more. Twice a week after the last bell rang, the gymnasium filled again. Not with chants of laughter, but with the sound of practice. Students lined up on the mats, some awkward, some eager, all respectful, as Daniel guided them through stances, strikes, and above all, the philosophy of martial arts. Strength without respect is weakness, he reminded them often, the same lesson he had given the twins. Emily watched proudly from the sidelines, sometimes joining in, her small fists punching the air with determination. The school changed. Discipline grew. Respect spread. The twins, once bullies, became Daniel's assistants, humbled but stronger for it. And Emily, walking through the halls with her head high, knew her father had given her more than safety. He had given her a legacy. Months later, when Daniel walked through the halls with his mop and bucket, students still greeted him respectfully, but now they also called out, "Sensei Carter." Some still laughed, but it was no longer cruel laughter. It was admiration, acknowledgement that behind the uniform and the mop was a man who had taught them something no textbook ever could. Daniel never sought fame, never demanded recognition. He still rose before dawn, cooked Emily breakfast, and swept the same halls he had for years. But everything was different. Because now, when he moved through Oak Ridge High, he was not invisible. He was the man who had shown them the meaning of strength. And every time he looked at Emily's proud eyes, every time he saw her smile when someone whispered, "That's her dad," he knew that was the real victory. The legacy he would leave her wasn't trophies or medals hidden in a dusty box. It was the lesson that true strength wasn't in fists or in fear. It was in respect, humility, and the courage to stand when life demanded it. That was the night Oak Ridge High would never forget, and that was the night a janitor became a teacher, a father became a hero, and a legacy was born.